Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with another video. This time we're going to do another Destiny 2 video, and we're going to be talking about loadouts specifically for PvP. And I decided to make a video like this because I've just seen, this is a common question that gets asked in any type of PvP forum or something. The Crucible subreddit is particularly always flooded with posts about like what do you use? Do you use everything like across all the different map types? Do you swap depending on the map? Do you use the same things for quick play and trials? There's tons of questions like that being asked. And I figure the best way to answer this is to just the more people who post their loadouts and talk about things, the better, right? Because people get more ideas. They can find things that better suits their play styles and the like. So that's what I'll be going over here. I'm just going to bring up my inventory, and I think I'm actually going to go over the armor first, and then we'll get to the weapons. Typically, the weapons are what's talked about most, but the armor can be done pretty quickly. So for the armor, you're basically just looking at stats, right? It doesn't really matter what armor piece you're using aside from the exotic. I typically like to use the transverse steps. I see a lot of people use the Eye of Another World as well. I think those are both pretty viable choices. Other than that, though, I think most of the gear is pretty trash. Unless you're going Stormcaller, then these armlets are pretty decent for the super, I guess. But other than that, yeah, I think if you were to go Sunbreaker or something, then these are decent as well. But I think that the best option overall is probably these transverse steps. It's just like the movement speed is great. The energy weapon reload is not really as important with this particular build I have right here, but for a while I was using an energy hand cannon, and if you're going to be using an energy hand cannon, it's actually pretty good. So depending on like what weapon you're using, this can be like more impactful. You know what I mean? But actually, yeah, and it reloads your heavy slot as well, I should say. So it's pretty good in that respect, especially for something like rockets, because you're not necessarily going to always want to dump both of your rockets in the same place. So I think these are a really great option overall. And this one is a bit of a trap, I think. Like, this sounds really good in theory, the skull, but since you're only getting probably like 1 to 2 supers a game, like 2 supers would be when you're absolutely crushing, right? Um, if you're absolutely crushing like that, it probably doesn't matter what exotic you're using. If you're only using 1 super a game, then living through your super casts can, most of the time you're probably going to be able to live through it anyway, and if you were to die, it's like you're pretty much just saving yourself one death here, right? Is the way I think about it. So there's like certain circumstances where it could be really useful, like in a supremacy match, where if you do a triple Nova Bomb and then you live, you get to pick up the 3 crests or something. So there's certain situations where I think it's definitely more valuable than others, but across the board, I just rather have the step for sure. And in terms of the actual stats, uh, it's really just the numbers that matter, right? And initially, I was like 1 mobility, 6 resilience, 9 recovery. I think that's a pretty standard build for people that are using transverse steps for sure. But I was playing some PvP, kind of like by accident. I had the wrong gear on. I noticed I had like 4 mobility, and it just maybe it felt a little better in some areas, mostly just to do with like peeking corners, because that's the only time mobility is really gonna impact you too much, I feel like. And I felt like I could kind of like peek the corner better while down sight with a little bit higher mobility than 1. So I've been trying this setup out. I don't think it's too bad. You still have quite a bit of recovery, but I just say anything between 1 to 3 recovery is fine, and then you obviously want 6 resilience for the hand cannon breakpoint, and all the rest goes into recovery. So that's my philosophy on the stats there. It's very difficult, really, because you can have... There's a lot of confirmation bias, I feel like, in this game, because the stat increases tend to be very minimal. I'm just going to try and get out of this area so that we don't have all this noise. And I died. But yeah, the stat increases are very minimal, and I feel like this is the same with the weapons, right? Like, the difference between weapons in this game can be somewhat small in the sense that like there aren't really many weapons that if you have good aim, you're going to be complete dog shit with, right? If you're a good player, you're going to be able to make use of most of the weapons, and that can be sort of difficult to, or that makes it more difficult to kind of narrow in on what's really the best weapon, because whenever you swap to a different weapon, you're going to have some degree of success. right? So it's a bit random. It's also going to depend on the people you're playing against and stuff. So you might have one day where you're playing like out of your mind and you happen to be using a different weapon. You're like, oh, this weapon, because obviously you want to attribute your change in performance to the thing that you changed on your loadout, right? And it can be dangerous to do that sometimes because I feel like in a lot of cases you're misplacing a lot of that difference, I guess you could say, or you're misplacing a lot of your trust in that weapon because it's most likely just there's other factors that are interfering there. So yeah, it's a very difficult thing. Like it could be just that I played really well that day with the 4 mobility, and I was like, oh, maybe I should try this, and now I'm trying it, and it's kind of the standard, but it's not really much different than what I was doing before. So take everything that you hear with a grain of salt, I guess, is the thing to draw from this. That being said, moving on to the weapons. So using Better Devils, and this is one where I've done a lot of testing with hand cannons, and I honestly do feel like Better Devils is just the best hand cannon in the game. I wasn't even using Better Devils. I haven't used Better Devils actually since the PC beta, and I just started using one, I'd say like 2 to 3 weeks ago. And that's because on the beta, I just felt like it was so powerful and so good, and I just wanted to try so many other different options in order to really give everything a fair chance and be like, is this better? Is this really better? Should I really be using the Better Devils over these other hand cannons? And to me, this just feels like the best hand cannon in the game, hands down, after going back to it. And I'll explain why, basically. So, I think the only real downside is that it's in the kinetic slot, and the problem with it being in the kinetic slot is that there are some weapons that I like to run, particularly submachine guns, like I really like the Antiope D, right? And you can't run an Antiope with a Better Devils, and that generally turns me off from running subs in general because I don't really like too many of the energy submachine guns. It's not that they're all bad. There's definitely some good ones and some standout ones, but I don't feel like any of them really compare to the Antiope. And yeah, so there's like disadvantages like that. Also, I feel like the Mida is a particularly powerful scout rifle if you're going to run scout, and especially for Warlock, because Warlock doesn't have anything like the Hunter has, like the helm, to give you radar while you're down sight. So Mida is like really good in that regard. Vigilance Wing is also another insane weapon. Lincoln Green's a good weapon. The Time-Worn Spire is a great weapon. Right? There's just so many. Nameless Midnight's a good weapon. There's so many good kinetic weapon choices, I feel like, in this game, that it's almost like whenever you find a good weapon, you almost want it to be energy, because then you can pair it instantly with another really good weapon. Right? So when you find a good weapon that's kinetic, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, now I have to make this, like, my primary choice over all those other weapons. Basically, by picking a Better Devils, I have to say I like it more than Vigilance Wing, I like it more than Time Worn, I like it more than Lincoln Green, more than Mida, more than Relentless, all these other weapons. So that's the downfall with kinetic weapons, but yeah, that's pretty much the only one, because everything else in this hand cannon is insane. It's got a pretty fast rate of fire, the 140 rounds per minute. Obviously, it's not the best, but it's pretty good, and the stability is great, the handling's pretty good, and then it has 13 in the mag when you take extended mag, which is just insane, and then it has explosive rounds. Now, explosive rounds is probably the reason why this hand cannon is so good, that and the mag size, and I'll kind of get into both of those. So we'll talk about explosive rounds first. So initially I was kind of undervaluing explosive rounds, I think, and I was trying, like I said, I was trying out a bunch of different hand cannons. I think my next favorite hand cannon after the Better Devils is probably the Dire Promise. It just feels so clean and really crisp to fire. Old Fashioned is good as well, but the Dire Promise is obviously the 150 archetype version of that. It doesn't have kill clip, but has lightweight. It's a really good weapon. But my issue with those other hand cannons when compared to the Better Devils is that the damage fall off in some cases is actually very noticeable. There's some kills that I know I would have got with Better Devils that I couldn't get with Dire Promise, for example. And it's just like a really frustrating feeling when you know you could be using a different weapon of the same class and have gotten a kill in certain spots. And I feel like there's not really that many situations where my Dire Promise is going to be getting me the kill over my Better Devils. That's the comparison I think you really have to make. The only time that's really going to happen is in a one-on-one against another another really skilled player that's hitting all their shots, right? Because technically, the Dire Promise, the 150 rounds per minute archetypes, have a higher time or lower time to kill than the Better Devils, so they kill faster. You need to hit 2 headshots, but that's not really a problem in most cases anyway. So, yeah, I think so that's going to be cited as like the reason why people use the 150 round per minute ones, right? But the problem with that is that it's really only going to help you in like a straight up 1v1 with like no cover or anything like that. And I feel like it's very rare where you get put into a situation where you like have to win the 1v1 in this game. It's a very team-oriented game, and the maps are just littered with cover. And if you're playing well, regardless, you're typically not finding yourself just out in the open. So I feel like the circumstances are very rare that you're actually caught in a situation where it's like, okay, I need to land these 4 headshots to kill the other guy, or these 4 shots to kill the other guy before he kills me. And because of that, I don't feel like the Dire Promise really brings enough to the table to counteract its weaknesses, which is mostly the range, I would say. And aside from the range, I actually just find that it seems like it's just easier to hit targets with the Better Devils. Particularly, I would say not the aim down sight, the hip fire. The hip fire just feels so great on the Better Devils. Again, this is a very difficult thing to quantify, right? Because there's no perk on the Better Devils that increases the hip fire or anything like that. But it just seems, I'm wondering if it has something to do with the explosive rounds. And I'm not talking about missing somebody and having the explosive round impact hit. I'm just talking about it almost feels like the hitbox on the bullets are bigger or something. People have mentioned something on the Crucible subreddit about bullet magnetism in this game. I really don't know if it exists for sure, to be honest, and I don't think we've gotten a confirmation from Bungie. But it just does like feel better, and I feel like in this game, that's what a lot of your gun choices are inevitably going to come down to when you're already choosing between good guns, right? Like you want to be using good guns, but there's always going to be some variance there, and there's just things that you're going to be more comfortable with and you perform better with. And in this case, I just feel like the Better Devils, it's almost just easier to hit shots than the Dire Promise. Not that it's really hard to hit shots either way in this game, or hard to hit them with the Dire Promise, but it just feels like this weapon is a tiny bit more forgiving, and it can make the difference in some of those cases, especially from the hip. I don't really notice the difference much down sight, but from the hip firing with this weapon, it just feels amazing. So, yeah, that's pretty much the blip about the weapon feel and the explosive rounds. I feel like they really do add a substantial amount of damage at range, because obviously that value doesn't change, so you're always hitting for the 25. And it's kind of just a big deal, because you can still get kills. You can still get 4 taps, like very far away with this weapon. And that's, I think, the key breaking point. It was Dire Promise. It becomes very hard to 4-tap people, maybe unless you're hitting all headshots. The Better Devil, at like extended ranges, right? With the Better Devils, it's just a lot easier to do that. So, definitely give the Better Devils the edge in the range department, as to be expected. And the other thing is the 13 in the mag. Now, Dire Promise actually has, I think, 11 in the mag, and it has the Precision perk, which is actually, I think, underrated for PvP. Everybody says it's a PvE perk, which makes sense, because it obviously feels like it's designed for PvE. But it's very easy to hit those 3 shots in a lot of cases, and if you do, you get an extra bullet. So you basically kind of have like 12 in the mag, or it's 13 in the mag if it's a 12 base mag. I forget which base it has, but that one has a pretty good magazine too. But I think having a lot of bullets in the mag is very important with hand cannons, especially on Warlock, particularly because of Devour. So Devour, if you don't know what that is, it's when you get a kill and you have Devour active, it basically like almost instantly refreshes all your shield. It doesn't quite do all of it if you're super low, but it does a lot of your shield. And that makes it very easy or much easier to win like these 2v1 situations. It still doesn't help necessarily that much in a straight on 2v1, like if they see you at the exact time you see them team shotting scenario, because obviously like they're probably just going to kill you before you kill one of them if they actually both see you first, right? But if you catch like one guy and you're killing him and then somebody starts shooting you, that's when this perk is really insane, because you'll kill somebody and then you'll instantly be turning on the other guy. And just having a larger mag is like really great for that. Like I'd say anything, you really want anything over 10 with a hand cannon. Like personally, I loved Sunshot for a while. I was trying to make that work, and Sunshot is great in a lot of ways. It has a great reload speed to kind of compensate for the low mag size, but I found that the issue really is that in most cases, it's going to take, you have to land all 8 shots to get the double kill, right? Because you're not really going to be coming up on, you don't want to assume that you're coming up on somebody who's already chunked. So you have to land all 8 shots, and the reload is very quick, but if you have to reload it all in a gunfight, most times it's either going to result in you getting killed or them getting away, right? Both are which outcomes that you don't want to have. So the 8 in the mag, I feel like, is just very limiting in that aspect, and with the Better Devils giving you 13 in the mag, that's just absolutely insane. Now you're going to say like, oh, but the reload speed, right? Like why wouldn't you just have 10 in the mag and then take the flared magwell perk to get much better reload speed? You know, all your stats are going up, you get more stability. We don't really need the stability and the extra stability rather. And I feel like the 3 bullets is more than worth it, because it basically gives you another kill, and it allows you to be more forgiving and missing more shots, right? Because like again, the whole point is we don't want to be reloading at all, like during a combat scenario. You can reload when the fight is done, right? That's how I think of it. With this weapon, you could potentially kill like 3 people on the same mag, and that's not even that unlikely, especially if you're factoring in like a target that's already been damaged. It's very easy to kill 3 people on this mag, and there's only 4 people on a team. So that's pretty good team clearing potential, and most of the time after you're done, you're not really going to be in combat still, right? So you can reload the weapon, and there's no penalty to there's no penalty really to having the fast or the slow reload speed when you don't have to be in combat in the next moment, right? Because you just did a team wipe or something like that. So that's my logic on using the extended mag here, and I just really preferred it since I started using it to the 10 bullets. So I would always recommend to take that on the Better Devils for sure. So yeah, that's pretty much the hand cannon, or the rationale behind the hand cannon choice. And I'm going to talk about my secondary choice here, and then I'm going to talk about the combination of the weapons and how that's important. And then I'll do the heavy last, because my heavy I kind of view as just a separate entity entirely. So the second weapon here is the Palladius Corrector. Now, this weapon is basically seen as like a Mida that's not a Mida, right? And it basically is sort of like just a Mida that has Rampage and no aim down sight radar perk. And I would pretty much agree with that. I do think it feels really good to shoot. It's very easy to hit headshots with this weapon. Great stability for a scout. The range is, perfect. The handling is actually really high, which is really nice because it swaps quickly, and then you get aim down sight very fast. I really prefer the quick handling scope. I feel like you don't really need the other one at all. The reload speed is decently fast. Pretty much everything about this weapon is good. It has Rampage. I think Rampage personally is an overrated perk for PvP. I play with some people who swear by it and think it's great, but I don't think it's anywhere near as impactful as something like Kill Clip, and that's the only thing I'd really compare it to. Obviously, it can make a difference in some situations, but it's very rare to me that I'm going to be able to just sit in a lane and like kill 3 people, right? I feel like at that point you're basically just pup stomping and anything would work, because you're probably playing against bad players. So I feel like against good players, Rampage use is obviously going to be limited, but still not terrible to have in the weapon, I guess. It has lightweight too, which I really like. So yeah, this is just a great all-around scout rifle choice. And I guess let me talk about what I run, and then I'll go into some other scouts. So the idea is that I like to run hand cannon scout on a lot of maps because I feel like it gives you a nice spread on the range. Um, on some maps that don't have very long ranges, I will actually swap to Swift Ride, which is a pulse rifle. And this is my favorite energy pulse for sure. Kind of like inaugural address as well. Has the kill clip and the outlaw, which is really great, really synergistic. But I just like the feel in this weapon a lot more, and the body shots landed increase the precision damage for a short time. Really good perk in my opinion. This weapon can down people insanely fast, and it's very accurate. It has a great sight, and it doesn't really. The range on it is great, which is what I'm looking for because initially I was looking for a pulse rifle to use on maps that have like shorter lanes, I guess, where I wouldn't want to use a scout when I was using Heart of Time. Problem with Heart of Time is that the range on it is complete dog shit. And it really does matter. Like for some weapon classes like hand cannons, even the ones that have the lowest range, of course not taking into account explosive rounds, but if we're just talking the actual weapons themselves, the range on the hand cannons, aside from the explosive round ones, varies quite little. I think it's like 3 meters or something, or maybe 4 meters. Pulse rifles is more like 20 meters. Like this one's in the low 30s. I think Swift Ride is like 49 or something. So there's like an actual huge difference between these weapons. And obviously you can use the scope, but I feel like I just hate using the scope. So like I don't know. Some people might like it, but I just like I would way prefer to use this scope. It's just that the range on it becomes so short. It's like a little bit further than my hand cannon range. Like it's not even really worth me using the hand cannon if I'm using this. So I don't think it's like a bad weapon in terms of its perks necessarily, but the range stat just kills it for me. And speaking of range, another reason why I don't use the MANANNAN actually, and the MANANNAN has explosive rounds, which like sort of makes up for the range, you would think, right? But the problem is that your Palladius is just hitting for its full damage at every range you're going to encounter, right? And the MANANNAN, the range is so low that if you use the scope that you want to use, the candle one, you're going to experience that damage drop off, and in some cases it's going to prevent you from getting a kill because you do just like a little bit less damage. I was actually talking to Crafty on stream a while ago when only the PlayStation version was released about this, and we were talking about the MANANNAN versus the SR4 particularly in his chat, and the MANANNAN versus the Palladius specifically, and he mentioned that he stopped using the MANANNAN because it just looked great on paper, but he was just leaving people with tiny slivers of health, and we were kind of like wondering why, because it was supposed to have the same damage. But I think that's why, because the range fall off just happens. It's actually like you can experience it in a PvP map, which is very rare for scouts. It's one of the few scouts that the range is so short that you actually run into issues there. So yeah, I've just stopped using this in favor of the Palladius, but yeah, so that's the little breakdown between those two weapons. But yeah, I pretty much switched between Swift Ride and a pulse or a scout rifle, and this pretty much comes out on maps like I want to say Vostok is the map. It's like the Earth map with the bridge in the center. Use it on that map. I used this on the map that was Trials last week or whatever, or I don't know if it's still this week, I think, right? Yeah, it's the whatever the Trials map is this week on Earth. I think it's another one like that. I'll use this on Javelin 4 sometimes because I typically don't play the far outside lane. So it obviously also depends on where you're playing on the map. But typically I will favor the long lanes. It's just on that map in particular, I feel like it's difficult to really make a living, so to speak, playing in the outer lane on that map because not enough action goes down there. And if you're playing too much to the outer lane, you're not going to be able to help your teammates team shot in the middle of the map. I used to try and play the outer lane a lot, and I've since gone away from it because I just felt like I was losing games or I was having high KDAs and just not impacting my team enough to actually win the games. sort of changed up my playstyle and started to win a lot more on that map. But yeah, I pretty much just use this on any map that doesn't have like a long range. There's like some map, I think it's an Earth map, that has like, it's almost like castle structures on it. And there's like a long open midfield. Like I definitely use a scout on that map. Trying to think of other maps that I definitely use a scout on. Oh, the one with the actual castle structure where it's like fortified. If you play control, it's like point B, I think, or something like that. That one I definitely use a scout on. I'm sorry that I'm not remembering the map names, and I just find the maps in this game to be very uninspired to begin with, so I don't really commit the names to memory. But yeah, I basically just swap between Pulse and Scout, depending on if it's going to be a little closer range map. Always use a Pulse. And Contingency Plan is another Scout that I'll sometimes use. This is like the best Vice full auto one, I think. These have theoretically the fastest time to kill, but you have to hit all your headshots. Getting body shots with this weapon really kills the time to kill. Fortunately, it's very easy to get headshots, and the reason why I like this one is because it has great stability and while having great range, because I believe the Black Scorpion suffers from the MANANNAN problem a bit, where it just has dog shit range, and yeah, that's a problem. But the handling stat isn't really a big deal for scouts all the time, because a lot of times you're just like sitting in a lane with them, and the reload speed is not a big deal, because it's, you know, you can easily kill 2 people with this, which is really all you need to be able to do. You can even kill 3 people realistically. Well, actually, I guess technically you can't, but you can like probably kill 3 people most of the time, because you're going to be team shotting or something. So yeah, that's pretty much the other scout I'll go to. And let me talk a bit about some pulse rifles, because I did mention I use the pulse rifle on the shorter maps. Now, people would say, like, why don't you use a quicker pulse? Well, I literally have been playing this game a ton on the PC. I still do not have a Nurgle, I think it's called, which is the 450 rounds per minute. So I haven't been able to try that one. I don't really like the Agenda 5 because the scope's on it. I heard Nurgle has a different scope. I'm not entirely sure. So once I get a Nurgle, I'm going to be trying that. But right now, I don't have one. I don't like the Agenda 5. I don't like the Heart of Time for the reasons I mentioned. The range is just too short. And all the other pulse rifles I like the Lincoln Green and the Time Worn and Vigilant Swing, are all kinetic. And I really like my Better Devils, so that's why I'm using Swift Ride. I still think it does great. For me, the pulse, the functional role of the pulse is more like long-range team shotting. So the fact that it's slow doesn't bother me as much as it would. I'm not really taking my pulse out in a 1v1 in a lot of cases, unless they're like really in the kill range of the pulse. Like typically I'm running around the map with a Better Devils, and I pull out the pulse to finish off kills or to help kill longer range enemies, and I'm pretty much never experiencing damage fall off because I'm using it at the proper ranges on the proper maps. And if I'd ever be getting into a situation where I have to shoot farther than that, then I have my Pallades out instead of that. So, and that's pretty much my primary energy. For my heavy, I use Sins of the Past. I think this is probably the best rocket in the game. I don't think many people would argue with that. Doesn't have as high velocity as other rockets. See, I don't really know. I take this thing to just give it a bit more velocity, because you only lose like a smidgen of blast radius, and I don't think the stability matters, so I don't know if this is optimal. I'm pretty sure it is, but and obviously you take Cluster Bomb. This thing serves me really well in Crucible and in Trials. I typically don't even like to play with heavy ammo, though. I always let my teammates pick up the heavy ammo, especially when I'm playing with a team I know in Trials. We have a bunch of people running around with Acreus, so I just let them take the heavy. I have an Acreus as well, but I just know other people that use it all the time and are like insane with it, so I just let them use it. Not that I think it really takes a ton of skill to actually get the kills with Acreus, but like there is a strategy of putting yourself in position to get multiple kills easier. So I just play with people who've really kind of mastered it, and I let them take the heavy ammo in most cases. So I don't really use a ton of this, but when I do, it's pretty effective. And the holstered weapon is automatically reloaded after a short period of time. Is great on it because you're not necessarily going to be firing off 2 rockets back to back. So yeah, just a really great weapon. And I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was like trial setup specifically. Um, what I've been talking about pretty much applies to both quick play and trials, but the one thing I will say for trials is that I've really been liking the pulse, especially on the map this week we have in trials, because a lot of people, when it's a close range map like that, they'll run hand cannon SMG, and SMGs are not bad, but I just feel like there's this really terrible feeling you get in trials because of the weapon lock, right? So it's like you'll go into a match, and then people will just be have like Uriels and Mitas and shit like that, and you're just sitting here with like a hand cannon and a fucking sub, and you realize you're kind of like outranged, and obviously like so the strat changes where you want to push them and get in their face and fuck them up with a hand cannon. But if they're really good players and they're good at managing their distance, I feel like it can really be very difficult to close that range gap without getting destroyed. So I really prefer having at least some type of long-range weapon in my arsenal. Whenever I get caught in that position, it's just like a sinking feeling in trials. Like, well, gonna have to take a little bit of a hit to my KDA to win this game. You know what I mean? Whereas if I had a longer range weapon, I feel like the game would go a lot smoother. So I typically like running a pulse on maps like you've seen this week. And then I use the scout rifle on the longer maps, but yeah, I'm really not a fan of the SMG. The thing is, like, if I was using a what do you call it, a energy hand cannon, I would probably be much more apt to use an SMG because then I could use the anti-ope. And I think the anti-ope is just so good it blows away any other SMG in the game. So I really like using the anti-ope, but since I'm using the better devils most of the time, I pretty much just don't run SMG because like other good SMGs are, I'd say like the phosphorus for the energy slot, the future war cult one, the there's one from Iron Banner that's good. There's one from it's got Grave Robber. It might be from Dead Orbit. No, I think it's actually from New Monarchy, Royal Dispensation or something. There's a bunch of good ones, but none of them quite compete with the Antiope, and that's why I pretty much just don't use SMGs. My playstyle, I feel like, is also a bit more passive than some players. I wouldn't say I'm a very passive player, but it's definitely not the most aggressive style. And that's partly because I feel like in this game, if you position yourself well and you're very aware of your mini-map and your environment and you know the maps well, it's actually very hard for people to close in on you. Like, it's a lot easier to keep people at range than to get close. It's not a game where you can get close super easily. And because of that, I feel like you really don't need super close range weapons if you're playing properly. If somebody gets in your face, it's kind of like your fault. And the Better Devil is actually still pretty decent up close. It's just obviously not, like submachine gun tier or sidearm tier, but it's still really good. And I don't really find myself getting in those super close range engagements a ton. So that's kind of like my philosophy on why I use hand cannon with a longer range weapon as opposed to using a sub. And like I said, I also don't really like a lot of the energy subs. And the final thing I want to round this out with is maybe talk about some energy hand cannons in case people are looking for other options. They want to run Antiope in the primary slot because Antiope's obviously beastly, another great loadout. But I think the Annual Skate is probably my favorite energy hand cannon. My friend that I played with turned me on to the Shatter piece, and I think it's kind of underrated. Has lightweight, has 12 in a mag with 150 rounds per minute. So really good stats there. The thing is, I feel like the initial hit is sort of inaccurate. But if you get the initial hit, I feel like you can really feel the Zen perk. Like, it just seems to really make a difference on this weapon. And I think that's what makes it viable. And I kind of like this one. So definitely check this weapon out. The thing is, it doesn't really have great range, but a lot of them don't have great range. Annual Skate is really great. Outlaw is always good to have. Has 10 rounds in the mag, which is decent. Sunshot is obviously really good. The mag size is kind of low, but the explosion effect is actually quite good. Um, because it's just kill targets, doesn't have to be precision kill. So I feel like that's actually a really big boon. I've definitely like seen that do a lot of work in PvP when people are standing next to each other and you're kind of like team shotting them. Sunshot's definitely a viable choice. Yeah, so I'd say those are the hand cans to look out for in the energy slot, but we've rambled for quite a while, and I hope you guys have learned something from this video, or not necessarily learned, but at least maybe got a new perspective. Uh, gave you some new ideas on what you might want to try. I don't really see too many people running pulse rifles. I don't want to say they're not meta or not really thought of, but I think they're definitely seem to be the lesser option. People tend to prefer the SMGs from what I've seen, or the scouts. So they either go really long range or really short. But I think the pulses are actually a lot more powerful than people give them credit for, and this one specifically is really powerful. It has a great sight and is really accurate. So yeah, that's pretty much my loadout in a nutshell. If you have any questions or anything, just feel free to leave them in the comments. Sorry, I keep misspeaking and stuff. Not used to talking for this long. Definitely, this is a longer video for sure. But I just kind of wanted to cover all the bases here, and I figure if people just want a quick loadout thing, they can just go anywhere and Google a decent loadout. There's tons of stuff on the Crucible subreddit. This is just a more in-depth look into my thought processes for why I have this loadout, and just my personal opinions on it. So that's why this video is a bit longer. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you found it interesting, and I'll talk to you guys later.